Has the market changed its mind about what the Fed may do next?
We have got to get inflation behind us. I wish there were a painless way to do that. There isn't.
I think this is a two-part policy mistake of historic proportion.
I think the odds of a recession in 2023 are very high.
I think you should offer the American people an apology.
Hello, welcome. I'm Chrystal with Financial Stockholm, and today is Thursday, November 24th. It's quiet day in the market in Europe because of the U.S. Thanksgiving. Markets closed in the U.S. and tomorrow's a half day. If it's a half day or maybe a full day in the market, but the market will be open tomorrow, so we'll get volume back. But we in Sweden, we're talking mostly about the interest rate. Our Swedish Riksbank raised rates by 75 basis points, and many Swedes were hoping for only a 50 basis point hike. But given the comments that Ingves had given before, I think that was optimistic dreams. And to think that he would only go 50 basis points, 75 looked to be on the clock. And perhaps we'll only get a 50 in the next rate hike, and that will be next year. But the comments coming out of Ingves are not positive. And the inflation issue is the key. And while you've seen some of the electricity prices coming down here in the South, they're still at very high levels. And they're still at very high levels in the north, and they've actually gone up in the north because they're actually getting winter. And as long as people have lived in Sweden, we've had winter. And in fact, some people speculate that's why northern parts of Sweden were not inhabited as earlier or as early as parts down here in the south. So this should not be news to anybody that the winter is cold in the north. And even with changing weather patterns and changing climate and 7-day forecast, you have a change in the system that's been occurring for quite some time. So the electricity prices will continue to be an issue. And the Swedish Riksbank raised the rates because of the inflation problems. And tied to that inflation, you see the food prices continue to go up dramatically. And you're looking at the consumers where they're paring down on different items to purchase, and the frequency of shopping seems to be going down. We've had a rising rate of unemployment, and you have a real issue where we're pretty much in a recession, although we haven't had the 2 quarters to say we're officially in a recession. I think many are treating this as if they are in recession. And so if you look at the financing for new projects, you look at the financing for startup companies, a lot of that money is dried up, and it's very difficult at this time. Now, that brings us to another issue on the electricity. And but before we move to that, with the Swedish Riksbank, they've also proved that they are unable to effectively trade the market. Now, they were very good at trading in a bull market, and I've heard that from a lot of friends who were good market traders in a bull market. And what we used to say in the US is never trade brilliance with a bull market. And so the Swedish Riksbank normally has a payout that they're going to make based on their market trading. This year, they're actually suffering at a loss. So you might find that a bit ironic that the interest rate institution is not able to effectively trade an uptrending market. And they were only able to trade an uptrading stock market. So I think there's a little question there, and the governance over the Swedish Riksbank is under the Swedish Democrat Party. The person who sits on the board now will be going through it, I hope, but there's no guarantee on his financial abilities or that he would actually do a good job and effectively change things around at the Riksbank. And I think that's an issue that needs to be resolved. And speaking of what the government is doing, the government came in with the Moderaterna and the Liberals, the Swedish Democrat and the Christian Democrats on saying they were going to be lowering taxes, and they would do things like lower the price of gasoline and diesel, and they would lower taxes on some of the savings programs, and they're failing on all of these issues. So the ISK accounts, which is a primary way for a lot of Swedes to save money and had been a way for them to lower the cost that they were going to pay on their capital in the account, is now going to be tripled. So these people will be paying much higher tax in an account that had been able to be very good and very effective for them to make money. So That's not going to win them any points. And then you're seeing gasoline prices have, they promised that there would be a lowering, and it was going to be in terms of kroners in the price per liter, and that is not changing. The tax on the gasoline and the diesel is not coming down, so that's a negative. And then also the household income taxes are going to start to go up starting next year. So the middle class will also be hit again. And this was a base that they had been trying to appeal to. So I think whatever happens, if we get to a no confidence vote in the Swedish parliament, it's harder to do than it is in England. So we won't see that sort of dramatic shift right away. But the Swedish Democrats, which have been receiving a lot of criticism and have been doing some things where they've been working with the Social Democrats, may be a significant factor to move for a vote of no confidence. And the fact that the Swedish Democrats are now discussing things with the Social Democrats would give the impetus to have some sort of no confidence vote. I don't think that would happen before, say, February of next year, but it's certainly something that is going to start to play into the cards. And while this government in place is unable to effectively put out what their new energy program is, or how they're going to build the energy, and to actually start to implement this, or to redo or fix the problems in the energy grid, they are going to be losing political power. One of the things that they also promised was a safer society. We've gone to the #1 murder rate. We've gone to the #1 shooting rate. We've also climbed in overdose deaths in Europe. So while we're one of the smallest countries, we are certainly achieving fame in shame. And so this is what you have to look at is it potentially a good time to start looking at the Swedish economy, and should this be a good time to start looking at the Swedish stock market? Because are we at the bottom? And I think that would be up to many other people, but right now the fundamentals are not in place to say that this is something you should do. And you have to also start to question the government approach, as they are not doing anything to get things in place, whereby, say, 2030, having new nuclear reactors or new energy programs other than windmills and solar build out and potentially hydrogen, and then continued reliance upon natural gas, liquid natural gas. Is this actually their real agenda? Is this a planned chaos to see that they would fail? And I think that's going to enter into voters' minds, and I think that's going to factor into any future elections coming up. And because you're going to have a lot of dissatisfied people, and when you see the demographic groups that went into the Swedish Democrat Party, it was the 18 to 30, 35-year-old group where they grew the strongest. And these are the people who are young, coming into the workforce, and most dissatisfied with how Sweden is trending. So then you might see a variation over to groups like the Knee Alliance, which is more a Sharia law party. And they had a much stronger effect or growth rate than anybody had anticipated. A lot of their growth was taken from the left party, the Vänster party, and from the Social Democrat Party. But you may see a turn from the people who went from those parties as well into the Swedish Democrats over to the New Alliance. And if they could gain up over 5%, they can get a shot at sitting in the Riksdag. So they could be a part of the next government. But when you look back at the fundamentals, again, the Swedish Moderaterna had promised more police and a safer society, and they're doing very little to that. Right now, while it's been cold, a lot of the crime has been in house fires, and I'm sure that can be blamed on people using wood to heat their homes. But we still are having shootings. We still are having, murders, deaths, not just by shooting, but others. And so the society is not changing. So fundamentally, we're close to a low. And we do have a society that's built on effectively social and communism as a kind of ideologies. But we also have a strong sense of capitalism, because we always have been a very strong capitalistic country. So it'll be interesting to see how things turn out. But we need to see effective changes. We have our energy minister, Ebba Busch. She's been down to Luxembourg. She's supposed to have come out with a plan about repaying the Swedish consumer. The payment dates are not yet clear. the dates for the use and the consumption have been laid out, but the payments to the consumer have not been clearly defined, nor has it been defined how they will be clearly calculated. So it's tough times in the Swedish market. We do see some companies actually achieving, but those are mainly tied to banking, where the rates are going up. And you do see some of the mortgages still going through. You see telecoms, people always pay their telecom bill. Our electricity companies are, well, you can trade some of them. They're going to keep going and they're going to do well, especially in this environment. So you're seeing a lot of these deep cyclicals and utilities paying well. And that's going to be interesting because, when the foundations that generally rely upon profits to pay out their dividends, and the industrial companies that pay out the dividends, if they're not paying out the dividends, you're going to see this switch over to these other dividend companies. But right now, we're still seeing the Swedish investors investing into small cap stocks, but a lot of these are very tricky. Some of them are still technology related, and the ones that have been doing well were the gaming companies, and then you saw some pullback, but we have new rules coming out on the gambling and how the gambling is going to be interpreted. There's a proposal that there would be a receipt given out if you're going into, say, a pizza parlor and there's a gambling game you could play, then the pizza parlor would have to be able to give you a receipt for your transactions. And that is going to be very difficult for these pizza parlors to do because they have to have their cash register hooked up to the gambling machine and then be able to provide a receipt. Now, there are alternative solutions like electronic cash register systems, which could do this and can email it and would also be in the cloud and send it over to the tax authority, or what we call Skatteverket. But the technology is not yet in place. And many of those companies are effective capital altruism. And so they don't want to get involved in gambling because they see it as wrong, despite it being legal. So there would be a question of that happening. We don't have a lot of the effect of the crypto. The crypto was a lot of the smaller traders who didn't believe in the standardization of the money and the government's controlling it. So they went into their own crypto, but they were not a large portion of the wealth. The higher upper class, of course, were being advised by the large banks to have crypto. And now, of course, that has been shaken up by this FBF scandal or FTT scandal. And but in the U.S., the FTT SBF individual, the rules he proposed for regulation, and his father was a professor at Stanford who helped propose those. What has been submitted to Congress in the United States is, I believe, in the hands of the Senate, and they are not making changes to what his recommendations were. And it looks like they would put through the regulations on the crypto in the US. And I'm sure once the US starts regulating the crypto, and if it sees Bitcoin as a commodity, I'm sure Europe will start to have similar effect and on how the digital trading will work. So right now, we don't have a lot of fundamental reasons on why you'd want to buy Swedish companies. One that would look promising that is not yet public is Northvolt, of course, and they are similar in concept to doing renewable energy through batteries to the Norwegian company Freyr, but you don't really have a lot of trading possibilities in these companies. So our areas of interest within the market would still remain to be things like pharmaceuticals, and then of course some of them like the telecoms. And some of the heavily cyclical companies and the deep industrials. So, and of course, mining is going to be coming in play. If we ever do get involved into the nuclear, we do have a lot of radium in the ground here in Sweden. And as Russia was a main supplier for the world on radium for the nuclear power plants, Sweden could be a good market for that, but due to our environmental rules, we may be off limits. So right now, I'm going to wish everybody a good day. And remember, you can always make money in the market if you're short-term or long-term, and it's, you follow the trend until it ends, and happy trading. Thank you very much.